Welcome to Lisa's Artistic Studio. Today I'm going to show you step by step how to paint this pretty little rustic spring landscape. So to get started, we need watercolor paper with our landscape lightly drawn on it. If you haven't watched my quick 5-minute tutorial on how to easily draw this landscape, you can click on the link above or at the end of this tutorial. Then I have a scrap piece of paper to test some colors on, a glass of clean water, some brushes, a small thin round brush, a medium round brush, a larger round brush, a small fan brush, and an oil paintbrush that has slightly more coarse bristles than the watercolor brushes do. Now this is a lot of brushes today. If you have these on hand, then great, but if not, that's okay too. This painting can be done completely with just a medium round brush if needed. The other brushes just make certain aspects a little easier and faster. Now for my paint colors that have already been mixed and have water added. I have green, yellow green, dark green, which is green and black mixed together, yellow with a touch of brown mixed in, and brown with a touch of yellow mixed in. I have black, dark blue or blue with some black added, light blue, purple, and purple with a bit of blue added, also known as blue-violet. And last but not least, a paper towel. Now let's get started by painting the sky, which will be painted using the wet on wet technique, which means we will paint the entire area with just water first. I'm going to use a large brush to get this done faster, but a medium brush is fine too. After the water is added, then use the medium brush to paint on some light blue for the sky. I'm going to paint mine a little blotchy, so it will look like there are some clouds in the sky. Now wait till the sky is completely dry, then take your dark blue color and paint the mountains and hills that are in the far background. Now let's paint the trees and bushes in the background using the bristly oil brush. Start with the yellow-green, and rather than spreading the paint, use a dabbing motion and paint what would be the tops of the bushes. Then while the yellow-green is still wet, use the pure green and dab that just under the yellow-green you just painted. Now take your dark green and paint just under the wet pure green you just painted. This will create a bit of a shadow and dimension. Now while the paint is still wet, use a small brush and paint some green around the edge of the house roof and chimney that are right next to the bushes. And lastly, using your oil brush again, take a touch of your yellow-brown and add that onto the tops of the trees and a few spots in the middle to give them a bit of a highlight. Now let's paint the fields that are in the background. Let's start by painting a section with just water. Then add a variety of colors like yellow-brown, yellow-green, green, and blue-green. Then paint the rest of the sections in the same way, and it might be fun to paint each section with a slightly different combination of colors. This way it will look like each field has something different growing in it. Wait until your fields are completely dry. Then let's mix a bit of the dark blue and green together to make a blue-green and paint the small bushes that are separating each of the fields. Now it's time to paint the fields surrounding the house. So use a large brush if you have it and paint it with water first. Now you'll notice that I'm going to paint right over the flowers that are drawn on into the field. And you can either go around or paint right on top of the small fence posts that are right next to the house as well, because we are going to use darker colors over the top of these things later. Now take some of your purple and add it to a few places in your field. Now don't paint the entire thing purple. You want to leave a few places to add some green in later. After you've got enough purple, then use some yellow-green and paint it in between the purple you just put down. You can also use some pure green or dark green and paint it at the base of the yellow-green to create some shadow and dimension. Now let's paint the foreground field the same way as you just painted the field by the house, starting with a water wash followed by the paint. But this time, paint around the fence posts because they will be lighter in color. And as a good rule of thumb, the foreground of any landscape painting should have more color, be brighter in color, have more contrast, and should have more detail than the background. So I'm going to try to put on a thicker amount of paint here to make it slightly more vibrant. When your fields are painted to your liking, let the paint dry completely and then using a medium brush, paint the pathway with water and then add some yellow-brown. After you've got the yellow-brown painted on, go back in while it's still wet and add a little bit of the brown-yellow in a few places. Now really quick, I'm just going to go back in and clean up a few areas that I goobered. If you need to do this, all you have to do is get a clean wet brush, rub the paint you want to remove with water, then use a clean dry paper towel and wipe it off. Now depending on the quality of paints you're using, some colors may not come off as well as others. I'm also going to do this a little bit to the flowers in the field that I painted over earlier. Now it's time to paint the rustic house. First, take your yellow-brown and paint the front face of the house. You can even paint over the doorway if you want. And try to keep it a fairly light color. Add more water to lighten it up if you need to. Next, we're going to paint the roof of the house by combining some yellow-brown and brown-yellow together. Now paint the front face of the chimney a light yellow-brown. Then take your brown-yellow and paint the underside of the roof, as well as the side of the chimney and the side of the house. When your house is completely dry, then take some black and paint in the doorway and the window of the house, and don't forget to paint in a few cracks. You can even paint a little black under the edge of the roof to create a bit of a shadow. Next, take a bit of brown and using a thin brush, paint some wood grains onto each part of the house. If you paint on the lines too dark or too thick, wet your brush and use some water to thin it out or spread it or dilute it. When your house is done, start painting the posts next to the house with brown paint. Then while they are still wet, add in just a touch of black onto the left side of each post to give it a shadow. Now do that same thing to your foreground posts, only using yellow-brown for the base color and your darker brown for the left side shadow. When your posts are painted and dry, go back in with a thin brush and paint some wood grain marks on the posts with your dark brown. Now it's finally time to paint the flowers in the field. Using a light or watered down version of the blue violet, paint a base coat for each flower. Then using the pure color of your blue violet, dab in some dots onto your flower, keeping the majority of them on the left side and spreading slightly into the middle. If your dots seem to be too harsh, you can use a tiny bit of water and soften your dots just a little bit. Now take some green and paint a nice thin stem on each of your flowers. For one of our last steps on this painting, we're going to add some blades of grass here and there. This is where the fan brush can come in handy. Get it wet and dip it in one of your green colors. Then starting at what would be the base of your grass, pull your brush quickly up and off of your paper. If you're worried about doing this, practice on a piece of scrap paper first. And if you don't have a fan brush, you can also just use a thin brush or the tip of a brush to paint your grass, but you'll still use the same hand motion. Now go ahead and add different colors and sizes of grass anywhere on your painting that you feel like it needs it. I recommend at least putting grass at the base of all the fence posts, under your flower stems, along the roadside, and at the base of the house. It might also be a good idea to add a bit here and there in the fields as well. Keep in mind that the farther in the distance your grass is, the lighter and shorter it should be also. Once as the grass has been painted, let's go back in with a normal brush and soften the bases of the grass and make them look a little more connected together with a bit of color and water. It's time for a bit of finishing touches. If you want, you can add some rocks on your pathway by using some brown to shape out each rock. Then use some water and rub the bases of the rocks, spreading the color out horizontally onto the road. After that's done, you can go back in and add some dark brown onto the left side of each rock. And for our very last step, take a thin brush and some black paint and paint some thin wire around the foreground fence posts and some squiggly wire to connect them all together. And here is your beautiful rustic spring landscape. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please check out more of my watercolor tutorials and consider subscribing to my channel so I can continue to help you discover your artistic side.